I love Smokey Robinson, as did my parents and grandparents too. I raised my own children on his music. So before I proceed with the discussion at hand, one thing I want for y'all to understand. There's no beef or fight that I'm trying to provoke. Nevertheless, I got to give Smokey this smoke. I don't have Smokey's lyrical skill, as you can plainly see. Africana historical and social studies is my poetry. I don't usually express myself using rhyme, but I'm going to step into Smokey's arena like he stepped into mine. My talk here pertains to the spread of some misinformation regarding Smokey's take on our group designation. I don't dispute his right to an opinion at all, but as the African proverb says, everything must stand on something, whether short or tall. The thing that I wish to bring into question is his problem with the term African American. With respect, his understanding of history does not match his mastery of song. For this reason, his Black American poem has been going viral for too long. Yeah, I get it. The brother can spit rhymes. As Bob Dylan said, he's one of the greatest poets of our times. My admiration for him should not be distorted. A Quiet Storm, Quietly Kept is one of the greatest albums ever recorded. But while Smokey is one of the most gifted lyricists in music history by far, I hate to say his knowledge of our history is not on par. You see, to his preference for Black American, I have no objection, but to the condemnation of the term African American, I do take exception. You see, the reasoning behind his position lacks understanding and knowledge of historical facts about the circumstances of how we came to this nation and the history of our defining our group appellation. Listen, African American has nothing to do with shame, being exotic or neurotic or political correctness. It simply is a label that identifies Africans living in America with the most literal directness. One of the false assumptions that I think you should know, we didn't just start using African American just a few decades ago. In fact, of all the names that we used in naming ourselves, including Negro, colored, and Black, the label African or Afro-American goes the furthest back. For the purpose of our discussion, we need to resolve the practice of calling ourselves Black and how it evolved. We'll take it from its origin as a tool for oppression to our appropriation of the term for cultural expression, and then to its current misapplication and rearrangement to foster cultural identity disengagement. The Portuguese enslaver painted Africans with the label Black, that's negro in Spanish, emphasizing physicality over identity so the humanity will vanish. Using a physical descriptor as a basis for a name is typically a practice for referring to animals or game. We have the great white shark, the blue jay, gray wolf, black bear, the goldfinch, red panda, golden eagle, and the white-tailed deer. Black American is the only label of ethnic identification that follows this pattern of animal classification. In the 60s, we reappropriated the name Black as a means of stigma reversal, undoing the defining of Black as evil, which had been universal. We said, talk Black, think Black, buy Black, Black is beautiful, be proud of Black. Celebrating Blackness meant celebrating your Africanness. Of that, there's no doubt. What do you think wearing afros and dashikis was all about? The point then is that being proudly Black was an affirmation of African connection. Never was it intended to imply separation or cultural rejection. Yet now Black is often misused in an effort to gloss over its connection to Africanness, its meaning and potency all but lost. Another thing concerning African American that we need to unlearn is the false notion that white folks came up with this term. The AME Church, the oldest still existing Black organization, was formed in America in 1794. I'll give you one guess as to what the A in AME stands for. The African Methodist Episcopal Church was founded by men of piety, who had 7 years before formed the Free African Society. In 1821, the first drama company that Black people did found was named the African Company by William A. Brown. The house they purchased to perform their shows was the theater that they named the African Grove. Going back to the 1800s, the Black press emerged to give voice to our people through the printed word. Of all the terms used to name us in those publications, you'll discover African or Afro-American was used more often than any other. In newspapers published by and for Black people from 1827 to 1899, African or Afro-American appeared in their names over a third of the time. Understand that with these examples, I'm referring not to names assigned by white folks, please trust. I'm talking about what we, American-born, English-speaking Black folks called us. Like those of us who are American citizens today, these early African Americans were a long way from the motherland from which their ancestors were taken, their languages and many of their customs forsaken. Yet and still, this did not erase their ancestral heritage, what some call race. Gradually, as a result of the influence of white cultural dominance, our adoption of the term Negro and colored would attain prominence. Throughout the time, there were folks pushing as a preferred designation the label American preceded by African or Afro, its abbreviation. Afro-American, Africo-American, and African-American are all meant to signify being an American citizen of African descent. The advocates for this naming preference were T. Thomas Fortune, Richard B. Moore, Malcolm X, and Jesse Jackson, just to name a few. Thus, using African in our name was a continuation of a circle, not the intro to something new. Don't be confused. Nobody uses the term African because of shame for being black. Though for academic accuracy, African American makes sense as a formal group name, being African and black are one and the same. When we describe ourselves as black, think of what is meant. We use it to describe our language, our rhythm, body structure, and facial features, all connected to being of African descent. I agree with the late brother Reverend Joseph Lowery. I love the term black for its poetry and African American for its accuracy. But still, for hundreds of years, we've been taught to despise and devalue Africa. That message has not abated. As a result, here we are today, our connection to our roots still being debated. Reasons for rejecting African American range from the illogical to the absurd. Let me mention some of the reasons that I've heard. I'm not African because I don't know my country or tribe of origin that I'm from. That's what some people say, but that reason is kind of dumb. So you think that because you can't say whether your people are from Gambia, Ghana, or Senegal means that you don't come from Africa at all? Do you have to know if a person is Vietnamese or Malaysian, Japanese or Chinese before you can say that he's Asian? Some say they're not African American because they ain't never been to Africa. If the notion that African means being African born is where you're leaning, I suggest you find a dictionary and look up the meaning. According to any dictionary worth its salt online or in print, African means of or relating to Africa or one of African descent. You won't say a Chinese American isn't Chinese if he's born in America and can't speak Mandarin or Cantonese. We got Irish American, Italian Americans, Asian Americans who've been in this country for generations. Most have never been to their ancestral nations. We acknowledge both their ancestry and their Americanness without fuss, but we act all confused when it comes to us. There are some folks who misguidedly insist that the African culture of American black folks no longer exists. Are we to believe that Africans are the only race or nation whose culture disappears due to global migration? Contrary to what you may hear, our African culture did not disappear. It didn't dissolve, instead it evolved. Before the various people of the world began to interact with other nations, they only referred to themselves using tribal designations. Thus it was that when on those slave ships came our ancestors, Mende, Igbo, Yoruba, Mandinka, Wolof, etc., the shared dreadful plight of our people rendered their differences moot, their connection to their mother continent being their common root. Despite being uprooted from their original home, despite the deliberate effort of the oppressors, the culture of these West Africans was not erased. It prevailed by adapting, sometimes changing its face. This adaptation, of course, was impacted by interactions with Europeans, Native Americans, and others. And while our culture was influenced by these interactions and connections, understand that these cultural influences flowed in all directions. That's how America became gifted by African music, art, language, and cuisine, not to mention our teaching what democracy really means. The one thing Smokey said that was on point for sure is that black is not our color, it is our core. But brother, if you follow that thought on its logical course, everything we call black has Africa as its source. While being born away from the land of our mothers and fathers, our language, our foodways, our ethos, our songs, when we came here in slave ships, we brought all that along. All rooted in that land they don't celebrate but do exploit. The roots of the Motown sound is there, it just sprouted in Detroit. One thing Smokey said that I do think is somewhat foul, he said, real Africans don't like us anyhow. He said continental Africans would reject African Americans if they came there. And we come to find out he himself never has been there. Maybe if he did go there as I have, he'd discover that the motherland is full of people who'd welcome him as a brother. I'm sure you can find West African individuals that might look down on you, but Clarence Thomas and Candace Owens live right here and they hate your black ass too. I've heard people say, Smokey Robinson included, that using African American is a rejection of America. I think they're deluded. I mean, it is an obviously ridiculous claim. American is right there in the name. I don't get how people find this confounding. The label African American is a compounding of terms that indicate your ancestral origin and the country in which you live as a citizen. Anyone tells you that we reject this country we built, they lied. At the same time, our place in the world should not be denied. That is what our identification with Africa conveys. It provides a worldview that broadens our gaze. Identity gives perspective that fuels our insistence to call out America's wrongs and rise in resistance. To hell with all that talk about America, love it or leave it. If we don't fight for better, then we'll never achieve it. Whoopi Goldberg says adding an ethnic adjective to American diminishes who we are. That suggestion is a notion that embodies the falsehood that we brought nothing to America but our bodies. I would tell Whoopi that statement is wrong, but that would upset her. But clearly what she is implying is that America is better. Why would we want to be American and not acknowledge our roots? It always amazes me that America has always rejected its most special quality, its rich diversity, its beautiful plurality. Downplaying ancestral culture is disrespect for diversity, which is truly sad. Only a racist would paint cultural differences as bad. Subtracting Africa from our name sends a message that's clear. It would say that we were nobody until we came here. Let's keep it real. It's not an enigma. The issue people have with African American is all about the stigma. We have been taught to think of Africa with shame, with such disrespect and utter disdain. When you understand the teaching of this self-hate, it's not difficult to figure why some are more offended to be called African than nigger. By fostering identity disassociation, what the oppressor has done is keep Africans in the world divided and thus under their thumb. As long as black people around the world think and operate in disunity, the U.S. and other nations continue to exploit us with impunity. This is the reason Malcolm X spent the last year of his life trying to build unity from nation to nation, stressing our identity as African people as our foundation. As I end this discussion, let me leave you with this. Make the pursuit of knowledge through critical study a personal mission. Be wary of those who offer assumptions and feelings and call it a position. In order to navigate this disinformation, to avoid and undo this miseducation, Stevie Wonder said, get yourself together and educate your mind. My friends, pay attention to content and not just rhythm and rhyme. It will be in your best interest, I humbly suggest, that you read more books and Google much less. And when you use the word black, and there's nothing wrong if you do, know that it ain't referring to your color, but to the African in you. So be black, love black, and think black, knowing that you're an African American, and ain't nothing wrong with that.